Hey guys, tonight we're diving into one of those bizarre, half-forgotten myths where Dionysus, yes, the god of wine, chaos, and very questionable life choices, manages to lose himself in his own domain. Picture this. You wake up face down in a vineyard, the smell of overripe grapes thick in the air, your head throbbing like a drum at a satyr's birthday party. The last thing you remember? Something involving a bet with Hermes, a barrel of unreasonably strong wine, and possibly a goat. Now, the sun is too bright, your sandal is missing, and the only company you have is a disgruntled snail making its way across your arm. This, my friends, is how Dionysus finds himself stranded in a random mortal vineyard, utterly separated from his usual entourage of raving maenads and hiccuping satyrs. And let's be real, if you woke up like this, you probably wouldn't survive the next 5 minutes. Ancient Greece wasn't exactly a forgiving place, especially when you're a disoriented deity with a reputation for turning people into dolphins when annoyed. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And hey, drop a comment with where you're listening from and what time it is there. Nothing like a global audience to remind us that somewhere out there, it's always wine o'clock. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Dionysus groans, rolling onto his back and squinting at the sky. The vines above him sway gently, their leaves filtering the sunlight into a dappled haze. He's definitely not in Thebes anymore. The air is too quiet. No drums, no shrieks of revelry, just the occasional buzz of a bee investigating his hair for nectar. Spoiler, it leaves disappointed. He pats his chest, relieved to find his thyrsus, that giant fennel staff topped with a pine cone, still tucked under his arm like a drunkard's security blanket. At least he hasn't lost everything. Historians still argue whether Dionysus' frequent disappearances were accidental or just elaborate pranks. Some say he loved mingling incognito with mortals, while others insist he was just that bad at holding his liquor. One fringe theory even claims he had a secret network of underground wine cellars where he'd napped for centuries. We'll never know for sure, but honestly, respect. As he staggers to his feet, Dionysus realizes two things. First, his divine powers feel fuzzy, like a watered-down drink. Second, the vineyard around him stretches in every direction, rows upon rows of grapes heavy on the vines. And at the edge of the field, smoke, a village, civilization, time to go introduce himself. Or more accurately, time to go avoid introducing himself. Because if there's one thing worse than a hungover god, it's a hungover god with a reputation. Your sandals crunch on dry earth as you. Well, Dionysus, but let's be honest, you're along for the ride now. Stumble toward the village. The sun beats down like an overenthusiastic blacksmith hammering your skull into shape. Every step sends a fresh wave of nausea rolling through you. You vaguely recall a drinking contest with Pan last night. Or was it last week? Time gets slippery when you're immortal. The village ahead isn't much to look at. A cluster of mud brick houses, a central well, and the unmistakable stench of a goat pen that hasn't been cleaned in far too long. A group of laborers trudge along the road, their backs bent under baskets of grapes. Their skin is sun-leathered, their hands stained purple up to the elbows. One glance at them and you realize, this isn't some idyllic pastoral scene. These people are exhausted. You straighten your rumpled chiton and attempt to look dignified. Keyword, attempt. Your hair is a nest of tangles. There's grape pulp drying behind your ear, and you're pretty sure that's a fig leaf stuck to your thigh. Not exactly the awe-inspiring presence you usually cultivate. A woman drawing water from the well eyes you warily as you approach. You lost, stranger? Not at all. You say with a grin that probably looks more unhinged than charming. Just admiring the local vineyards. She snorts. Admire from a distance, then. Old Kyrkos doesn't take kindly to wanderers. Ah, so there's a name to this misery, Kyrkos. You store that information away as you shamble toward what looks like a tavern. The building leans slightly to the left, as if it's had one too many drinks itself. Inside, the air is thick with the sour tang of cheap wine and unwashed bodies. This is where you drop a fun historical fact. Taverns in ancient Greece were not the refined symposiums of philosophers. They were rough, rowdy places where workers drank themselves into oblivion on stuff that could probably strip paint. The wine was often cut with seawater or resin, both as a preservative and, you suspect, to punish people for being alive. You slide onto a bench just as a serving boy slams a clay cup in front of you. The liquid inside looks suspiciously like muddy water. You take a sip and immediately regret it. Gods above, you gasp. Did someone die in this amphora? The boy shrugs. Kyrkos waters down the wine, says we don't deserve the good stuff. Oh, this won't stand. Your fingers tighten around the clay cup as the acidic swill coats your tongue. Watered down wine is one thing, this is outright blasphemy. You're Dionysus, god of the vine, patron of intoxication, and this abomination is being served under your divine jurisdiction. The indignity burns sharper than the hangover. The serving boy watches you with hollow eyes, waiting to see if you'll actually finish the drink. You set the cup down with deliberate slowness. Tell me about this Kyrkos, you say, keeping your voice light despite the storm brewing in your chest. The boy glances toward the door before leaning in. Owns every vineyard from here to the river. Pays us in moldy bread and threats. His voice drops to a whisper. Last week, old Theron asked for his wages in actual coin. Next morning, they found him trampled by his own donkey. He makes the sign against evil. Very tragic, very convenient. You drum your fingers on the sticky table. Mortal cruelty is nothing new, but there's something particularly galling about exploiting workers in a vineyard, your sacred domain. The air grows heavier, the tavern shadows stretching just a little longer than they should. A fly buzzing near your cup suddenly drops dead. Quirky historical tidbit. Ancient Greek workers actually went on strike. In 388 BCE, Athenian vineyard laborers staged what might be history's first recorded walkout over, you guessed it, wage disputes. Scholars still debate whether this was true worker solidarity or just really bad management. A burst of laughter draws your attention to a corner table where three men are playing knucklebones. One of them, a lanky youth with a split lip, catches you staring. He holds your gaze a beat too long before deliberately rolling the dice. They land in perfect alignment. The rarest throw, the Aphrodite's kiss. His friends whoop, but his eyes stay locked on yours. Ah, he knows. Not what you are, perhaps, but certainly that you are. There's always one mortal in every generation with just enough divine blood to sense the uncanny. You raise your cup in silent salute. He doesn't return the gesture, but the corner of his mouth twitches. An understanding passes between you, one that doesn't need words. Outside, a donkey brays violently. The tavern door bursts open to reveal a man with a belly like an overstuffed amphora and a face that could sour milk. The room falls silent. Kyrkos, the serving boy, breathes, frozen mid-pour. The merchant's piggy eyes scan the room before landing on you. Who's the vagabond? Every muscle in the boy's body tenses. You take another sip of the terrible wine and smile. Just passing through, you lie smoothly, admiring your unique vintages. Kyrkos' jowls quiver with suspicion. See that you don't linger. He kicks a stool out of his path as he storms toward the back room. You wait until his bulk disappears before exhaling. The Knucklebones player mouths a single word at you. Run. You wink and order another drink. The moment Kyrkos disappears into the back room, the tavern exhales collectively. Conversations resume in hushed tones, but the air still prickles with tension. You swirl the swill in your cup, watching the sediment swirl like a miniature storm. That's when you notice it, the faintest shimmer across the wine's surface, a telltale iridescence no mortal eye would catch. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greeks believed wine could reveal divine presence. Priests would scrutinize offerings for god signs, unusual colors, sudden temperature changes, or, allegedly, faces forming in the liquid. Modern chemists suggest it was just bacterial films or temperature-sensitive resins, but try telling that to a 5th century BCE believer mid-ritual. The Knucklebones player slides onto the bench opposite you without invitation. Up close, you see he's younger than you thought. Maybe 18, with the wiry build of someone who's been underfed since childhood. He smells like crushed grape leaves and iron. You're either the bravest man in this village or the stupidest, he mutters, pretending to examine his dice. Kyrkos doesn't like strangers, especially ones who ask questions. You lean forward. And what makes you think I was asking questions? He flicks his gaze to your cup, where the unnatural sheen has now resolved into a distinct pattern. A tiny, perfect grapevine coiling up the clay interior. His throat bobs as he swallows. I'm Linus, he says abruptly. I prune the north fields. Pleasure. You extend a hand, letting a single drop of wine fall from your fingertip. It hits the table and blossoms into a miniature rose. I'd introduce myself properly, but you nod toward the back room. Linus doesn't flinch. Smart kid. The workers have a saying, he whispers. Kyrkos' grapes grow sweeter every year because he waters them with our tears. Scholarly debate alert. Modern historians still argue whether ancient vineyard slavery was primarily economic exploitation or ritual subjugation. Some linear B tablets suggest certain vineyards were offered to Dionysus, making the workers' suffering technically divine tribute. Awkward. A crash comes from the back room, Kyrkos bellowing at someone. Linus' fingers twitch toward his belt, where a pruning knife hangs. He'll check the storage cellar next. That's where he keeps the real wine, the stuff he sells to Athenian merchants. His eyes dart to your face. The stuff that hasn't been watered. You finish your drink in one gulp. The horrible taste doesn't even register anymore. Show me. As you stand, the tavern's lone oil lamp flickers violently. Shadows leap up the walls like grasping hands. Linus doesn't comment, but his knuckles whiten around his dice. Two drunkards near the door suddenly slump forward, snoring mid-sip. The serving boy stares at their cups, then at you eyes wide. You wink. Just a coincidence. The path to the cellar is darker than Hades' sense of humor. The cellar stairs creak underfoot as you descend into the damp darkness. Linos a shadow at your heels. The air shifts from tavern stale to something richer. The earthy musk of fermenting grapes, the tang of oak barrels, and beneath it all, the unmistakable metallic bite of fierce sweat from the boy behind you. Kyrkos' private stash is exactly what you expected. Row upon row of perfectly sealed amphorae, each stamped with his personal mark. A cluster of grapes with a tiny crown. The irony isn't lost on you. This mortal thinks himself royalty in your domain. You run a finger along the nearest vessel. The clay hums under your touch, the wine inside practically singing. Quirky tidbit. Some Dionysian cults believed fine wines had literal voices, that if you drank enough, you could hear them whisper secrets. Modern sommeliers might call this suggestibility. You call it Tuesday. Linos edges past you, his pruning knife now in hand. He keeps the key around his neck, he whispers. But sometimes, a sharp twist of his blade pops the wax seal off an amphora with practiced ease. You raise an eyebrow. You've done this before. Tasted? Yes. Stolen? His grin is all teeth. Never enough to notice. The wine that pours out is deep purple, almost black in the dim light. You don't need divine senses to know this is the good stuff. Aged, spiced, probably worth a month's wages per cup. Linos hesitates before handing you the first sip. The flavor explodes across your tongue. Sun-warmed hillsides, summer storms, the faintest hint of pomegranate. And then, scholarly debate incoming. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek wines contained psychoactive additives. Some temple texts mention visions post-consumption, while chemical analysis of residue shows traces of mandrake and wormwood. Tonight, you'd bet your thyrsus this batch is spiked with something special. The cellar walls ripple. Linos' face fractures into a dozen shifting expressions. Hope, terror, awe. The wine in your cup swirls counterclockwise despite your steady hand. Interesting vintage, you murmur. Does Kyrkos know his winemaker is dosing the good stuff? Linos pales. That's impossible. We don't. A floorboard creaks overhead. Both of you freeze as heavy footsteps cross the tavern. Kyrkos' voice booms. Who left this lamp burning? Linos moves first, jamming the stopper back into the amphora. But it's too late. The scent of opened wine hangs thick in the air. A drunkard could track it. You sigh and snap your fingers. Every torch in the cellar flares bright as noon. The shadows don't just retreat, they curtsy. Linos makes a choked noise as the spilled wine rises from the floor in perfect droplets, reversing its flow back into the amphora. Run. You advise cheerfully as the cellar door flies open above you. Kyrkos' silhouette fills the doorway, his famous donkey-kicking boots poised on the top step. Thieves! The last thing you see before grabbing Linos' arm is the merchant's face twisting in rage. The last thing you hear is the distinct sound of every amphora in the cellar simultaneously sprouting legs. You burst into the vineyard with Linos in tow just as the first amphora crashes against the cellar door behind you. Not from impact, from movement. The boy risks one terrified glance backward and promptly trips over his own feet. What in Hades? You yank him upright as a wave of sentient wine vessels comes pouring up the stairs. Their clay bodies wobble on newly formed stumpy legs, their spouts gurgling what can only be described as battle cries. One particularly enthusiastic specimen launches itself at Kyrkos' head. Mainstream historical fact. The ancient Greeks took wine storage deadly seriously. Amphorae were sealed with resin and stamped with the producer's mark because wine fraud was punishable by exile or worse. Some legal codes specified different fines for diluting wine versus outright counterfeiting. Tonight's events would have gotten someone thrown off a cliff. Linos' fingers dig into your arm as the first wave of rogue pottery reaches sunlight. Did you, are they? Technically, he did. You nod toward the still screaming Kyrkos, now batting away Amphorae with a broom. That mandrake-laced wine? Turns out it reacts fascinatingly with divine attention. The boy makes a sound between a laugh and a whimper. Around you, the vineyard itself seems to be holding its breath. Then a grapevine whips out, snagging an Amphorae mid-leap. The terracotta shatters against the ground in a burst of wine that immediately soaks into the earth, only for a fresh tendril to sprout seconds later, heavy with twice the normal amount of fruit. Linos goes very still. The vines remember. Scholarly contention. Modern botanists debate whether plants retain memory of trauma. Dionysian cults absolutely believed vines held grudges. Given what's happening before your eyes, you're inclined to side with the ancients. A crash echoes from the tavern as Kyrkos finally barricades himself inside. The remaining Amphorae mill about confusedly before beginning to graze. One's nibbling at a post while another butts affectionately against your leg. Linos exhales shakily. So, you're late for an appointment? You pluck a newly oversized grape from the vine. It bursts between your fingers, the juice startlingly sweet. Let's just say I'm invested in workplace conditions. The distant roar of Kyrkos threatening to skin someone alive drifts on the breeze. Linos' face hardens. He'll take this out on the workers. You study the boy, really study him. The calloused hands, the defiant set of his jaw, the way he positions himself between you and the village despite his terror. Mortals never cease to surprise you. A plan takes shape, accompanied by the distinct mental image of Pan's exasperated face when he hears about this. Tell me, Linos, you muse, how do you feel about festivals? Somewhere behind you, a grapevine creaks ominously toward the tavern's shuttered windows. Linos stares at you like you've just suggested juggling live scorpions. A festival? Now? His gesture encompasses the chaos, the sentient Amphorae now frolicking among the vines, the muffled shrieks from the barricaded tavern. Fact that the grape clusters overhead are visibly swelling as you watch. One overachieving vine has already twined itself around the village well like a possessive lover. You shrug. Best time, really. Harvest moons in 3 days. And a crash interrupts you as an Amphorae finally succeeds in headbutting through Kyrkos' barricade. Ah, see? The infrastructure's already preparing itself. Historical tidbit. Ancient Greek harvest festivals. Oskophoria? Anyone? Weren't just parties, they were ritual obligations. Miss one, and next year's crops might mysteriously fail. Modern archaeologists found cursed tablets buried in vineyards reading things like, "If you skip the dance, may your wine taste like donkey tears. Harsh but fair." Linos opens his mouth, but a sudden twang cuts him off. The tavern's door bursts outward as a dozen grapevines, now thick as a man's arm, lasso Kyrkos mid-tirade and yank him into the open air. He dangles there, red-faced and kicking, as the vines slowly rotate him like a particularly unappetizing kebab. You snap your fingers, right? First order of business. Decorations. The vineyard responds like a trained chorus line. Vines snake up every vertical surface, weaving themselves into arches. Overripe grapes detach and float midair, transforming into lanterns with a pop of divine spark. Somewhere in the distance, a herd of goats begins bleating in perfect rhythm. Linos makes the sign against evil. You're not just a god. You're the Shu. You press a finger to his lips. Mystery makes everything more fun. Scholarly debate alert. Classicists still argue whether Dionysian festivals were spontaneous eruptions of joy or carefully orchestrated psychological pressure valves for oppressed communities. Looking at the villagers now creeping from their homes, first in terror, then in awe, you'd say it's a bit of both. A child darts forward to touch one of the floating lanterns. When it doesn't burn her, the dam breaks. Suddenly, the whole village is in motion, hauling out tables, tuning makeshift instruments. Even you wince, sacrificing a rather scrawny chicken to you with alarming enthusiasm. Kyrkos' shouts grow increasingly shrill above the din. I'll have you all flogged. This is my land. A well-aimed vine stuffs a grape cluster into his mouth. Linos exhales. This won't end well. You grin. Oh, it'll end spectacularly. From the forest edge, the first answering cry of a Maenad echoes through the twilight. The party's about to get interesting. The first Maenad crashes through the grapevines like a comet, her leopard skin cloak flaring behind her as she cartwheels over a terrified villager's head. Her eyes lock onto yours, wide, wild, and thrilled. Lord Dionysus, she shrieks, voice ricocheting off the hills. We searched for you in 3 rivers and a badger's den. Behind her, no fewer than 12 satyrs tumble into the clearing in various states of intoxication and undress. One is wearing a cooking pot as a helmet. Another appears to be crying over a very confused tortoise. Mainstream historical fact. Maenads weren't just party accessories. They were serious religious devotees who could, allegedly, tear bulls apart barehanded during rituals. Their signature move, the sparagmos, a cheerful little practice of dismembering things in your god's honor. You make a mental note to steer them toward the bread loaves instead of livestock tonight. Linos backs into you as the nearest satyr sniffs his hair. Friends of yours. Regrettably, you grab a wineskin from a passing reveler and take a swig. The liquid burns with the familiar electric buzz of divine-grade fermentation. Don't make eye contact with the one wearing mushrooms as earrings. He gets ideas. The village transforms around you. Farmers shed their work tunics to dance barefoot on upturned barrels. Children shriek with laughter as animated grapevines toss them into the air and catch them in leaf-padded nets. Even the Amphorae have joined in, forming an impromptu conga line that wobbles dangerously near the fire pit. Quirky tidbit. Ancient Greek parties had strict drinking rules. Watered wine for discussion, straight wine for dancing, and mixed with unknown herbs for seeing the face of the divine. Judging by the villager currently attempting to hug a tree while sobbing about its noble bark, you'd say we've solidly entered Phase 3. Then the music shifts. The makeshift flutes and drums melt together into something older, something that vibrates in your teeth. The bonfire leaps 10 feet tall without burning hotter. Shadows stretch and twist until every villager has a stretched-out doppelganger dancing beside them. Kyrkos chooses this moment to finally chew through his grape gag. Silence! He roars from his vine-bound perch. I'll see every one of you crucified for this. A hush falls. The Maenads stop mid-spin. Even the drunkest satyr freezes with a wineskin halfway to his lips. You sigh and step forward. Scholarly debate incoming. Historians still argue whether the godly epiphany moments in myths were actual divine interventions or mass hallucination events. As every villager's head whips toward you in perfect unison, their eyes reflecting the unnatural firelight, you suppose it's a bit of both. The vines drop Kyrkos unceremoniously at your feet. Now then, you murmur, swirling your untouched wine. Let's discuss your management style. The merchant looks up, really looks for the first time. His face drains of color as he finally sees you. Behind you, Linos whispers, "Oh shit." Kyrkos' mouth opens and closes like a beached fish, his jowls quivering under the weight of divine realization. You let the silence stretch, just long enough for the first bead of sweat to slither down his temple. Around you, the festival's chaos continues in muted slow motion. A floating wine jug pours an endless stream into a villager's cup. Children giggle as vines braid flowers into their hair. And somewhere in the distance, a satyr is teaching a very confused donkey to line dance. Historical context. Ancient Greek justice often involved public shaming rituals. Debtors might be forced to sit in the marketplace wearing nothing but a loincloth while creditors pelted them with rotten figs. What's about to happen to Kyrkos isn't technically that, but you've always believed in putting a creative spin on tradition. You take a leisurely sip of wine. Let's recap. You underpay workers, water down wine, and allegedly arrange fatal donkey accidents. The vines at your feet coil tighter around Kyrkos' ankles. And yet, you gesture to the transformed vineyard. Your grapes thrive. Curious, isn't it? Linos edges closer, his pruning knife glinting. The north field yields double what it should. We always said the soil was hungry. Scholarly contention. Modern soil analysis shows some Mycenaean vineyards had unexplained spikes in fertility. Some archaeologists blame bad guano deposits. Others whisper about darker offerings. The truth probably lies somewhere between accounting fraud and restless earth spirits. Kyrkos finds his voice. I made this land prosper. Spittle flies from his lips. These ingrates wouldn't have bread without me. A grapevine slithers up to whisper in your ear. You nod thoughtfully. Ah, speaking of bread. You snap your fingers. The ground beneath Kyrkos ripples. Villagers gasp as something round and white erupts from the soil. A skull, its jaw still clamped around a rusted coin. Then another, and another. 7 skulls total surface in a neat semicircle, their hollow eye sockets fixed on the merchant. The oldest villager, a hunched woman missing 3 fingers, makes a choked noise. Thalas's crew, the previous workers who ran away. The festival's music stutters into silence. Even the drunkest reveler sobers at the sight. Quirky fact, ancient Greek burial coins, Charon's obols, were supposedly payment for the ferry to the underworld. Recently, archaeologists found several with bite marks, likely from dying individuals clenching them too tightly. These skulls' coins bear distinct molar imprints. Kyrkos jerks against his vine bonds. You can't prove. You pluck a grape from overhead and squeeze. Juice drips onto the nearest skull, sizzling where it touches bone. The vineyard's voice hums through your fingers. Whispers of midnight burials, quicklime, and the particular weight of a debt unpaid. Linos' breath comes fast. What now? You meet the villagers' expectant gazes. Now, you declare, we vote. collective inhale. Democracy might be an Athenian novelty, but justice? That's older than Olympus itself. The vines deposit Kyrkos onto a suddenly empty barrel. The skulls arrange themselves as jurors. Somewhere, a lyre plucks itself in a foreboding minor key. You lean close as the merchant's knees knock together. Pro tip: begging works better than bluster. The barrel creaks under Kyrkos' weight as the impromptu trial begins. Villagers press forward in a half circle, their faces flickering between torchlight and shadow. The skull jurors rattle slightly whenever someone speaks too loudly. Whether from divine intervention or the breeze, no one dares ask. You lounge on a makeshift throne of grapevines, which, admittedly, keeps poking you in inconvenient places, and gesture for proceedings to begin. Let's hear grievances. Keep it concise. We've only got until dawn before the magic wears off, and this all becomes a very awkward dream for everyone. Historical context. Ancient Greek trials lacked formal prosecutors. Accusers spoke for themselves. The penalty for false testimony? Having your property confiscated and your credibility publicly destroyed. Tonight's punishment might be slightly more creative. The three-fingered woman steps forward first. He took my son as collateral against a debt, she spits. Said the boy would work it off in a season. Her missing fingers twitch. That was 6 harvests ago. A murmur ripples through the crowd. The vines around Kyrkos' wrists tighten. Next comes a sunburnt man with a permanent stoop. Caught me taking a sip from the fermentation vats last summer. He rolls up his tunic sleeve to reveal a brand in the shape of a grape cluster. Said it would help me remember whose wine it was. Scholarly debate alert. While slave branding was common in Rome, evidence in Greece is scarcer. Some argue marks like these were temporary pitch or paint, while others point to skeletal remains with suspicious scar patterns. Either way, Kyrkos seems to have invented his own brutal tradition. Linos doesn't speak. He just walks to the nearest vine and snaps off a cluster of the supernatural grapes, now black as obsidian, and squeezes. The juice drips onto the ground between Kyrkos' feet, sizzling as it etches a single word into the dirt. Liar. The merchant's bluster finally cracks. I'll make reparations. Double wages. A festival every. You hold up a hand. Here's the deal. The vineyard stills as even the insects pause to listen. Option 1. You sign over the land to the workers tonight. Every vine, every press, every amphora. You lean forward, including the sentient ones. Kyrkos pales. And option 2? A slow smile spreads across your face. We see how well you grow as fertilizer. The skull jurors click their teeth in apparent agreement. Quirky tidbit. Ancient vineyards sometimes buried ritually sacrificed animals, or, in darker rumors, people, to ensure fertility. Modern excavations occasionally find skeletons arranged in poses suggesting they were planted like vines. Coincidence? Probably not. Kyrkos' throat bobs. The villagers hold their breath. Then, I'll sign. The words rush out of him like wine from a cracked jug. Just keep those things away from me. He kicks at the nearest skull, which responds by rolling aggressively toward his foot. You snap your fingers. A vine whips forward with a stylus and wax tablet seemingly conjured from thin air. Wise choice. As the merchant scribbles his shaky signature, the first rays of dawn paint the eastern sky. The magic thrums differently now, less like a festival drum and more like a heartbeat slowing after a sprint. Linos meets your gaze. What happens when the sun rises? You watch the villagers begin to cluster around their new deed, their faces alight with something fiercer than hope. That, you murmur, depends entirely on them. Dawn bleeds across the vineyard in streaks of gold and pink, revealing the aftermath of divine intervention in stark relief. The sentient Amphorae have curled up in sunny patches like contented cats, their legs retracted. The skull jurors now sit in a neat row along the well, empty sockets gazing placidly at nothing. And Kyrkos, well, the former vineyard owner currently resembles a wrung-out sponge, slumped against the tavern wall as villagers take turns spitting near his feet, but not on him, because apparently even in victory, old habits of fear die hard. You stretch, feeling the familiar tingle of your powers waning with the night. Mainstream historical fact: ancient Greeks believed dawn was Apollo's domain, when rationality returned after Dionysus' nighttime revels. The dichotomy explains why so many treaties were signed at sunrise, fewer enchanted wine jugs interfering with negotiations. Linos appears at your elbow holding 2 cups. "Real wine this time," he says, handing you one, "from the unblessed barrels." The sip is surprisingly decent, earthy with a hint of smoke. You raise an eyebrow. "Old Theron's recipe," Linos explains quietly, "before Kyrkos made him cut corners." His gaze flicks to where the workers are already arguing over pruning schedules. "Think we can actually run this place?" Before you can answer, a shriek cuts through the morning air. One of the Maenads comes sprinting from the tree line, her hair full of leaves and her arms full of... Is that a beehive? "Lord Dionysus," she wails, skidding to a stop. "The satyrs found your missing sandal. Also, there's a bear." Quirky tidbit: bears were sacred to Artemis, but occasionally showed up at Dionysian festivals, likely because nobody told them they weren't invited. Some vase paintings depict Maenads hand-feeding bears honeycomb, which explains both the bee situation and why ancient beekeepers drank heavily. Sure enough, a very confused-looking brown bear ambles into the clearing, one of your ivy-wrapped sandals dangling from its mouth. Behind it, the mushroom-eared satyr waves cheerfully. "We made a friend." The villagers freeze. The bear sneezes. You sigh and snap your fingers. The sandal pops free, arcing through the air to land at your feet. Slightly chewed, but serviceable. The bear, now eyeing the nearest grape cluster, seems content to ignore everyone. Linos exhales through his nose. "Is this normal for you?" You get used to it. You finish your wine just as the first worker approaches. The 3-fingered woman, now standing straighter than before. "We've decided," she announces. "The vineyard will be run collectively. Equal shares for all who work the land." Her eyes flick to Kyrkos, who flinches. "And one last task for him before he goes." Scholarly contention. Historians still argue whether ancient Greek land reforms were truly egalitarian or just reshuffled power structures. But the glint in this woman's eye suggests she's about to invent some fascinating new precedent. Kyrkos is hauled to his feet and marched toward the fermentation vats. The villagers' murmurs follow. Teach him to tread grapes properly, without the usual foot ointment. See how he likes it. You decide not to inquire further. As the sun climbs higher, your Maenads begin yawning, the satyrs curling up in patches of shade. Even the vines seem to be retracting their more flamboyant mutations. Linos studies you. You're leaving. It isn't a question. The vineyard hums with mid-morning activity around you. workers singing as they prune back the now docile vines, children chasing drowsy satyrs with flower crowns, the occasional glug as an Amphorae belches wine-scented bubbles. It's peaceful in a way that makes your divine skin itch. Linos hasn't moved from your side. He smells like crushed grapes and wood smoke, his fingers drumming an uneven rhythm against his thigh. Will it last? He asks quietly. The magic, the fairness. You watch a group of villagers carefully inventorying Kyrkos' former storage room. One man bursts into tears when he finds a cache of hidden coins. The magic? No. You flick a grape into the air, catching it in your teeth. The fairness? That's up to you. Historical context. Ancient Greek worker cooperatives did exist. The Aranos system allowed groups to pool resources, but they were fragile. One bad harvest, one persuasive outsider offering better terms, and the whole structure could collapse. You don't say this aloud. Let them have their hope while it's fresh. A commotion erupts near the fermentation vats. Kyrkos stumbles into view, his feet stained purple up to the knees, his tunic soaked with grape pulp. The villagers laugh as he flees toward the road, his once fine sandals slapping against the dirt. The mushroom-eared satyr appears at your elbow. Pity, he sighs. I was going to teach him the really fun pruning techniques. You're about to respond when the breeze shifts. A familiar scent cuts through the vineyard's aromas, salt and ozone and the faintest hint of lyre strings. Apollo. Quirky tidbit. Despite being polar opposites, Apollo and Dionysus shared temples at Delphi. Winter was for Apollo's rational prophecies. Summer for Dionysus' ecstatic revels. Some scholars argue this represented ancient Greece's dual nature, order and chaos needing each other. Right now, you'd settle for needing him to go away. The sunbeam that hits your face is absurdly bright. You squint as Apollo's voice rings inside your skull like a badly tuned lyre. Brother, you've been misplacing yourself again. Linos frowns at your sudden wince. You okay? Migraine, you mutter, of the radiant golden variety. Apollo's presence presses harder. Father's furious, says you corrupted another workforce. Also, something about a bear. You glance at the aforementioned bear, now napping with its paws in the community-bred oven. Not my fault wildlife loves me. Scholarly debate alert. Classicists still argue whether Greek gods could actually communicate telepathically or if this was just poetic license. Given the way Apollo's mental voice is currently vibrating your molars, you're voting for horrifying reality. Linos grips your arm. You're glowing. Sure enough, golden light is seeping from your pores. The villagers stop working to stare. One child points and whispers, "Is he dying?" "Worse," you groan. "I'm being summoned." The last thing you see before the light swallows you is Linos lunging forward, his hand passing through your now corporeal arm. His shout of "wait" gets cut off as Olympus yanks you home. The vineyard vanishes. Somewhere below, a single Amphorae weeps wine tears. Olympus greets you with the subtlety of a thunderclap. One moment you're inhaling earthy vineyard air. The next you're sprawled on polished marble that smells aggressively of lemon polish. The ceiling above you stretches into infinity, its swirling clouds artfully arranged to showcase Zeus' latest vanity project. A lightning bolt-shaped constellation that definitely wasn't their last century. Mainstream historical fact. The Olympian throne room wasn't a fixed location. Accounts describe it shifting between mountaintops, celestial spheres, and even the space between breaths. Modern scholars suggest this was metaphorical, but the way your stomach just somersaulted suggests otherwise. A shadow falls across you. Explain. Booms a voice that vibrates your ribs. Why I'm receiving complaints about sentient pottery. You roll onto your elbows. Zeus looms over you, his beard crackling with static electricity. To his left, Hera examines her nails with lethal disinterest. To his right, Apollo, that traitor, grins like he's about to win a bet. You sit up slowly. In my defense, the Amphorae were very rude before I enchanted them. Zeus' eyebrow twitches. A nearby thunderbolt rattles in its stand. Hera sighs. Must you always turn mortals' lives upside down? Technically, I turn them right side up. You pluck a stray grapevine from your hair. How did that get there? And offer it to her. Peace offering? She flicks it away. The vine whimpers. Apollo leans forward. The real question is why you bothered. Since when does the mighty Dionysus play agricultural reformer? Quirky tidbit. Dionysus was unique among Olympians for spending significant time among mortals, not just visiting but living as one. Some cults believed he aged backwards, growing younger during his stays on Earth. This explains exactly nothing about your current predicament. Zeus' fingers drum on his throne. You disrupted the natural order, says the god who turns into swans for dates. The temperature drops. Hera's eyes gleam with sudden interest. You backpedal fast. What I mean is, the natural order included a tyrant starving children. If that's Olympus approved, maybe we need new guidelines. A beat of silence. Then, ha! Hephaestus' laugh echoes from the hallway as he limps in, his forge apron still smoking. Told you he'd say that. He tosses Zeus a small bag that clinks with coin. Scholarly debate alert. Historians still argue whether the gods actually gambled on mortal affairs. The existence of fate's dice in temple artifacts suggests yes, though whether they cheated remains hotly contested. Zeus weighs the bag in his palm before sighing. One day, that's how long you have to fix this vineyard situation before I smite it into a crater. You open your mouth to protest, but he's already vanishing in a puff of ego. Hera follows, but not before shooting you a look that promises future discomfort. Apollo lingers. For what it's worth, he murmurs. The bear was a nice touch. Then it's just you and Hephaestus in the suddenly empty hall. The smith god raises an eyebrow. Need a fast ride back? You glance at his workshop, where a pair of winged sandals sit half-assembled. Will they explode? Only if you land wrong. The vineyards pull tugs at your ribs. Somewhere down there, Linos is probably organizing a defense against Kyrkos' inevitable return. The workers are likely already facing their first crisis. Maybe the wine ferments too fast. Maybe the bear got into the honey stores again. You grab the sandals. Make it 2 pairs. I've got stops to make. Hephaestus grins. Knew you'd say that. As you buckle the straps, Olympus fades around you, but not before you swipe a handful of ambrosia from the snack table. What? Revolutions need catering. The winged sandals sputter like a poorly trimmed lamp wick as you dive through the layers of reality. Past the astral plane's shimmering curtain, through a flock of very startled storks, one of which leaves a feather stuck to your forehead, and finally into the thick vineyard air with all the grace of a drunk satyr. You hit the dirt rolling, coming to a stop at Linos' feet. He stares down at you, pruning knife in hand and dark circles under his eyes. You're back. You spit out a mouthful of soil. Miss me? The boy doesn't smile. Behind him, the vineyard thrums with frantic energy. Workers dashing between rows, their voices tight with panic. The bear from yesterday lumbers past with an entire honeycomb in its jaws, pursued by 3 screaming children. Linos hauls you up. Kyrkos returned at dawn with Athenian mercenaries. They're camped at the north ridge. He jerks his chin toward the hills where spear tips glint among the trees. Said he'll burn the vines if we don't surrender by sunset. Historical context. Athenian soldiers for hire were notoriously ruthless, often hired by wealthy landowners to resolve peasant revolts. Their contracts specifically forbade burning crops, unless the employer provided adequate compensation. Given the smoke already rising from the nearest olive grove, Kyrkos clearly ponied up the drachmas. You pluck the stork feather from your brow, and the magic? Fading. Linos gestures to a grapevine that keeps tying itself into apologetic knots. The Amphorae stopped moving at noon. The skulls just rolled away. A crash echoes from the storage hut where the 3-fingered woman is handing out makeshift weapons. Sickles, broken amphora handles, one particularly menacing cheese grater. The villagers' faces are grim but determined. You reach into your chiton and produce the stolen ambrosia, a golden cube that smells like a summer orchard compressed into candy form. Ever wanted to be a hero? Linos eyes it warily. Is this going to turn me into a tree? Only if you're boring. You break off a crumb and pop it into his mouth before he can protest. Quirky tidbit. Ambrosia's effects were wildly inconsistent in myths, sometimes granting immortality, other times just really good hair. Modern scholars suggest it was code for psychedelic honey, but the way Linos' pupils just dilated into starry expanses suggests otherwise. He gasps as the divine energy hits. The pruning knife in his hand sprouts vines that braid themselves into a shield. His chiton mends its tears, the fabric darkening to deep green. When he looks up, there's something unsettlingly feral in his grin. Okay, he breathes. What's the plan? You glance toward the north ridge where Kyrkos' banner flutters. The mercenaries are forming ranks. How do you feel about guerrilla viticulture? Somewhere behind you, the bear belches honey-scented flames. The afternoon air hangs thick with the scent of crushed grapes and impending chaos as you survey your makeshift army. Villagers clutch their improvised weapons, their faces a mix of terror and exhilaration. The 3-fingered woman has strapped baking trays to her arms as armor. The children have organized themselves into a grape ambush squad, their pockets bulging with overripe ammunition. Even the bear has taken sides. It sits obediently at Linos' feet, though its honey-stained muzzle still twitches toward the hives. Mainstream historical fact. Ancient Greek peasant revolts rarely succeeded against professional soldiers, unless they had terrain advantage, which is why you're currently standing in the vineyard's narrowest choke point, where the vines have grown so thick they form a natural maze. The mercenaries will have to enter single file, and by the time they realize the plants are hurting them, it'll be too late. Linos flexes his fingers, watching vines curl around his wrists like living gauntlets. How long will this last? Sunset, you admit. Maybe sooner if Zeus gets impatient. A horn blast echoes from the ridge. The mercenaries begin their advance, their bronze breastplates glinting. At their center rides Kyrkos on a donkey, his face purple with rage. You snap your fingers. The vineyard writhes. Grapevines slither across the path, weaving barricades. Roots erupt to trip the first line of soldiers. One particularly enthusiastic vine yanks a mercenary spear away and starts fencing with itself. Quirky tidbit: the earliest known reference to moving plants appears in a 4th century BCE comedy where a vineyard terrorizes a tax collector. Scholars dismissed it as satire until carbonized vines were found in Pompeii, their tendrils frozen in uncharacteristically aggressive poses. Kyrkos screams orders, but his voice is drowned out by an unexpected sound. Music. Your satyrs and maenads come crashing through the underbrush, their instruments wailing. The mushroom-eared satyr blows a war trumpet fashioned from a ram's horn and a cooking pot. Chaos erupts. Mercenaries slip on strategically placed grape mush. Villagers pelt them with rotten fruit. The bear, now inexplicably wearing a helmet, lumbers into the fray and starts licking the soldiers' shields clean, which is somehow more demoralizing than actual violence. Linos grabs your arm. Kyrkos is running. Sure enough, the merchant has abandoned his donkey and is scrambling up the hillside. You could stop him. A single thought would send vines snaking after him. But you don't. Scholarly debate alert. Historians still argue whether Dionysian myths endorsed vengeance or mercy. The answer, you suspect, is both, depending on how good the wine was that day. As the last mercenaries flee, the villagers erupt in cheers. The vines sag, their magic spent. Linos ambrosia glow fades to a soft shimmer. You feel Olympus pull growing stronger. Zeus' deadline approaches. Linos studies your fading form. You're leaving for real this time. You tousle his hair, leaving a single grapevine twined behind his ear. Make good wine. The world dissolves into golden light. As the last traces of Dionysus fade from the vineyard, something curious happens. The workers, still catching their breath from the battle, notice the grapes have ripened overnight, each cluster perfectly formed, each berry bursting with sweetness. The winepress seems to work itself. The fermentation vats bubble with unnatural vigor. And if occasionally a pruning knife moves without being touched, or an empty cup refills itself at dusk, well, every village needs its quirks. Linos grows into a legend, the boy who bargained with a god and won. His wines become sought after across Attica, though he never sells a single amphora without ensuring his workers are paid fairly first. Some say he occasionally vanishes into the vineyards at midnight, returning with leaves in his hair and stories of music no mortal could play. As for Kyrkos, he's last recorded running a failing olive press in Thebes, where his product is notorious for turning vinegar in the jug. Travelers whisper that his face bears strange marks, not scars but faint imprints, as if invisible vines once squeezed too tight. The vineyard itself thrives for generations, surviving droughts and wars with uncanny resilience. Archaeologists will later find its foundation stones arranged in a peculiar pattern, not quite a face, but something like a smile. And if you ever visit that hillside at twilight, when the light slants just so between the leaves, you might hear it, the faintest echo of laughter, the barest whisper of a toast, to the mortals who dared, to the God who cared, to the wine that remembers. Now close your eyes, let the story settle like sediment in a fine vintage, and drift into dreams where adventure lingers at the edges of sleep.
you.